Very good to be with you. So I like to start this way. There was a time, there was a moment where I was sitting in a seminary classroom. I don't remember exactly what the topic of discussion was, but I know we were discussing other religions. And it felt like it felt like we were giving Christianity a pass and being very, very critical of these other religious traditions. And that threw me, for some reason, into a place of deep doubt, where I had to sort of struggle through, what I believe and why I believe it. Now, to understand why that's significant in a way is because of my background. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I grew up in a Christian home, and it's a very, very, very Christian home in a way because my folks were in the ministry. It was a ministry that was started by my great-great-grandfather. It's a ministry started as a ministry for alcoholics so that they could find the gospel and through that find recovery and that sort of thing. So I'm growing up as the great-great-grandson of the founder. We were in church every time the doors were open, Sunday schools, youth groups, retreats, camps. I grew up in New Jersey, so we had snow camp every year. That was awesome. I did mission trips. I did international mission trips. I did Bible college and ministry. I even taught at a Christian school, and then find myself in this seminary classroom doubting my faith. I got through all of that, like the full force of what we in the church offer for kids to find their faith, and to make their faith their own, to grow in their faith. And somehow I made it through all that without ever asking why I think it's true. I believed it was true. I'd given my life. I'm in seminary. I've been doing ministry. I'm headed towards more ministry. I believed it. I'd given myself to it, but I had never stopped to ask why I think it is true. And what hit me as we're talking about these other religions and being very critical, and I kind of think I realized that I was being very critical and giving Christianity a pass, and that I'd been giving Christianity a pass my whole entire life, is what if I was born in a Muslim country? What if I was born where the predominant religion was Buddhism or atheism was the worldview? Right? What would I be believing? Well, my pattern was to believe what I grew up with. So I would probably be a Muslim, or I would probably be a Buddhist. I'd probably be an atheist. And so I'm in this place of doubt. I'm in this place of, for the first time in my entire life, asking the really deep and difficult questions of why. But you know what I mean by that? It's that painful question of why. I'm sure I sat around in a Sunday school class or youth group where we kind of said, well, why? But we already knew the answers to the why questions when we ask questions like that. But it's a difference when you're asking why, where you're genuinely open to the answer being Christianity is just false. There is no good reasons, right? Being genuinely open to that for the very first time sitting in a seminary classroom. Now, to jump to the end of the story a little bit is just to say that I leaned into those questions. I leaned into those doubts. And what did I find? Actually, lots of answers, lots of truth, lots of things that actually were quite compelling and quite reasonable and gave me good reason to believe that Christianity was in fact true. And so we want to talk and think about doubts a little bit because I think they provide for us opportunities to lean in and find the truth. Okay, so this is a fact that keeps me awake a little bit at night. It's the kind of thing that I don't even remember exactly where I came across this study where I began following what we now call the youth exodus, But there is a staggering fact, and that is that a majority of our Christian kids that grow up in the church like I did, walk away from at least the church and they do so in their college years. Right? I mean, it makes some sense, right? They're out of high school. They're kind of out from mom and dad's gaze a little bit and pastor's gaze. They're making their own decisions. We wake our kids up on Sunday mornings and basically make them go to church. That doesn't happen anymore. You got to make your own decision. And a staggering number of them are choosing to not attach themselves to church. And I'm really interested in the question of why. Like, why is this? By the way, this statistic has grown. So from the time that Barna first started tracking this, it's gone up by 3 or 4 percentage points, which is actually huge when you're talking about a big sociological phenomenon like this for it to be. So it's getting worse. We have more kids walking away today than we did even 10 years ago. But 64% of them, 6 out of 10 students. So think of your youth group. When I get to speak to youth groups, a lot of times I'll have sort of pre-calculated this or whatever. I'll have them all stand up, and then I'll have roughly 60% of them sit down, right? And it's a pretty, disturbing image of how many statistically are walking away from the church. Now, again, they're not necessarily, it's from the church, and I want to be careful to not overuse the statistic here. So it's not that they're always walking away from the faith or walking away from God or even walking away as a Christ follower. Many do, of course, right? Many do, but there's a good percentage of them that just don't want to attach to an organized, so-called organized religion. I guess they're like disorganized or something. I don't know. Right? And so they just aren't attached to a church. But a huge percentage, and some do come back to the church, right? A lot of times it happens where they have kids and they want their kids to have something that looks like their childhood. And so the church was part of their childhood. So they bring their kids to church and they sort of reattach. But the statistics of those that reattach but remain nominal are actually quite high, right? And we if you're part of a church and active in a church, you know who I'm talking about. So this is a big deal. And of course, many of these never darken the doorway of a church again, and in fact, abandon the faith altogether. So there's lots of folks walking away from the faith, and I want to ask why. Why is that happening? Now, I am not going to be able to give you a thorough answer, and I think we should be actually quite hesitant to think we've got the thorough answer. It's not as if, right, if everybody would just come to the Faithful Witness Apologetics Conference, then we'd be good. Like, we wouldn't have those numbers anymore. It's not as simple as that, and we don't want to simplify it. I just want to talk about one reason that I think is the case, that is, reported by these folks as the reason why they're walking away. And I think it's that the church is not always just a safe place. It's not a safe place to doubt and to deeply question. Right? Are we encouraging that? Are we encouraging our kids, either in our homes or in the church? And it doesn't even have to just be kids. Are we encouraging people? Is the church a safe place for us to come with our questions? Right? In my mind, it's kind of like, it should be the safest place. It should be the first place that we go, but it tends to not be. The Barna study, they've done some follow-up studies on it, and one of the top 6 reasons identified by Barna is stated as that the church does not feel friendly to those who doubt. Right? It feels unfriendly to those who struggle with doubt. And then the rest of the reasons have doubt sort of lurking in the background. So I think it's the reason number 3 has it as it feels like the church is sort of at odds with science, right? So you can kind of see how doubts would be in the background of that, right? The church is just not always a safe place for us to come with our questions and voice our actual doubts. But different from that, what I want to say, here's kind of my thesis for us this morning, is that I think asking deep and difficult questions is a crucial part of Christian discipleship. To be a Christ follower, what I want to lay out the case for is that we should be asking those deep and difficult questions. Now, we should be asking the easy questions too, probably, but like the deep and difficult ones are need to be asked. We shy away from those very, very often. But here's the thing, right? They're deep and difficult that's what we're saying. Like, they're difficult. So being difficult means that they're going to lead us to places of struggle, to places of doubt. And we just need, I think, a healthy view of this and a proper view of this, right? So that we know what to do with doubts. Right? I've had people say, like, are you seriously telling us to question God? Yeah, kind of am. Right? But we're going to try to spell it out in a way that I hope, if that sounds like that's kind of like, a bad way to go about it, or you might have teenagers where you think, man, I don't want them to question God or question Christianity because I feel, well, let me try to spell out the approach to that I hope will make that be more plausible. Okay, but I got to do the professorial thing and define. Right? So what is doubt? Now, you might be wondering, why is there a flying saucer in the thing? Okay. Remember the old sci-fi movies where like every ship comes equipped with a tractor beam, right? They can kind of suck in the other ships or do whatever they need to do with that. That's kind of what it is to doubt. Like we come into the tractor beam of an objection, or what we're going to call a potential defeater. Right? I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But what it really is a kind of seeming or a kind of feeling where we feel like one of our beliefs just might be false. Right? Now, doubt can manifest in many different ways. It can manifest in many different ways. But what I'm trying to say here is this is just the core of it. This is what it really leads from. This is at the heart of it in a way. I think of this as the core of doubt, is that it's when one of our beliefs seems like it might be false. That's all it is, right? Now that might manifest in a kind of emotional, almost irrational, almost phobic, sort of thoughts and feelings about some claim or other, right? I had a student come into my office one time who she had been in my apologetics class, but she just had a really big heart for kids, and she had been on a recent mission trip to a really impoverished place. And so she's like, I know all the answers to the problem of evil and the problem of pain and suffering, but I just see the suffering and I just kind of can't emotionally get there to understand why God would allow it. So it can manifest in what we might call emotional doubt. But I think the core of doubt is this. It's where we just feel the pull or the force of an objection. We get in the tractor beam, so to speak. So I do think, now, I could be wrong. I don't, style myself as, someone who's equipped to talk about emotions, right? I don't suggest me for marriage counseling, for example, right? My training is going to be all and only as it relates to the philosophical, the intellectual. So we're primarily focused on what we're going to call intellectual doubt. So that is important for me to mention. But again, I'm committed to saying that I think that's at its core. Okay, let's do just a little epistemology here. Now, this could be made even more robust and rigorous, I think, but this, I think, gets at defining a little further, again, doing the professor thing to try to give something of an analysis of what doubt is. So here's what doubt is. But here's the thing, the reason why we do this is not just to impress you, though I hope you're impressed, but I don't know, is philosophy impressive? I don't know if that's really fruitful. Anyway, right? But we'll actually see ways in which we kind of get guidance from the philosophical analysis. I think that's pretty amazing. So here's what I mean by that. So S, a subject, a person, is S, doubts that P, a proposition, a claim, if and only if, that's what the IFF means, if and only if, meaning that this is the definition, this is what's required, and this is all that's required. One, that S believes that P, right? So you're doubting that P. I'll give you an example of this here in just a second. S believes that P, so you still believe. You're doubting the belief, but when you doubt a belief, you still have the belief. So you believe that P. Two, S believes that Q is a defeater for P. So some other claim Q, you believe that belief, that claim, if true, would defeat your belief, P. You with me so far? Okay, and then thirdly, S finds Q to some degree plausible. You're starting to kind of feel the draw of that objection, that Q, that claim Q, but you don't yet believe it, right? Because if you believed it, you'd have a contradiction and the belief in one would be out, or it should be. All right, so let me give you a few examples of this to illustrate what I'm talking about. So Susie is the S there. Susie doubts that God exists. She still believes that God exists, but she believes that gratuitous evil. What do I mean by gratuitous evil? It would be like unjustified evil. Evil that we can't see a reason why God would allow that amount of evil. Does that make sense? It's gratuitous. It seems over and above, right? That's the really difficult problem with the problem of evil. So Susie believes that gratuitous evil is inconsistent with God's existence. And Susie finds the arguments for the existence of gratuitous evil somewhat plausible. She doesn't yet believe there's gratuitous evil. She's just finding those arguments plausible. She's being drawn in like the tractor beam to that. So she's doubting. She's in a place of doubt. Here's another example. Steve doubts that the Bible is a moral standard. He believes that it's a moral standard. Right? He's doubting that belief that he has. 2, Steve believes that being out of step with cultural norms would mean that the Bible does not provide a moral standard. So because the Bible recommends, teachings on the impermissibility of, say, homosexual relationships, right? That's out of step with cultural norms, right? That's 2. And then 3, Steve is finding somewhat plausible that the Bible is out of step with cultural norms, right? Steve is doubting. All right, does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. I can, of course, take questions on that when we get there, but let's talk about the value of doubt. One of the things that I want to say quickly, whenever I do, in fact, get, that's not a self-portrait, by the way. Right, I don't have a goatee, but no. Whenever I get a student to my office or in my church, I'm an elder at my church, who's doubting their faith, or somebody contacts me online, one of the first things I want to just say is you're normal. And it's okay. Like you're doing something that's normal and okay. Right. In fact, for those that, if you're a doubter out there, I really want to tell you that I think you're probably more courageous. You have a kind of intellectual courage if you struggle with some of this. Why? Because I think you're willing and honest to look at these things. Where your peers who don't struggle, it might be because they lack courage to do so. So I want you to know that if you do doubt your faith, or you have someone in your life that doubts faith, right, I think they just need to know that it's normal. But I don't want you to stay there. I don't want you, right, I'm not, there are various voices out there that today celebrate doubt and deconstruction, and we'll talk about deconstruction in a minute, but they celebrate it as if that's the end in itself. Like that's the goal, is that we would get to a place of doubt, now you're good. Right? That is not my view at all. I think we have to kind of navigate between the extremes of thinking that we should never doubt, that it's sin, that it's wrong, that it should be avoided at all costs, and the extreme of thinking that that's the end in itself. It's not. It's like push-ups. I don't know if it's one-handed or not, right? Those seem really painful, but right, it's like push-ups. Push-ups are not the end, unless you're, sick and twisted. But no, right? Push-ups are the means for strength, for health, right? Push-ups aren't good in themselves. Push-ups are instrumentally good for the goods that come as a result. Does that make sense? And doubts are like that, in my view, is that they're not the end, they're not what we aim at, they're not the goal, they're not the destination, but they can be an important stop off on the way. They do have instrumental value because I think they signal to us, oh, I got to think some more about that. I gotta look into that, right? My belief might be false. Now let me lean in, let me look, and let's go. Because here's the reality. I think this is just true, And I'm committed to it, though it's a little scary in one sense, and that is that doubt, when handled properly leads to truth and knowledge. Right? When handled properly is the important clause there. I mean, whichever way you go, you might have a wildly false belief. Well, I do hope you doubt that. I do hope you doubt that and lean in and find truth and knowledge. I say it can be a little scary because it could mean that you have to change your views. And I'm committed to this, even though I want every single person in the room to come out with stronger and more reasonable Christian beliefs. I'm committed to it that said this idea that when we lean into our doubts, we will find, and do it properly, we will find truth and knowledge. And the irony is, we will grow in our faith. I just want to say, that's my story. When I leaned into my doubts, when I truly began to question, I found lots of answers, because there are lots of answers out there. There's lots of compelling cases out there. And the irony is, the thing that most of us worry about when it comes to doubts is that we're going to lose our faith if we really look at them too closely. You with me, right? The irony is that it led, for me at least, and I think for many others too, an even greater faith. Okay, so let's talk then about how to doubt well, how to doubt properly. Okay, the first thing I want to tell you to do is hang on. So I'm going to tell somebody that you're normal, but I'm also going to say just hang on. Don't abandon the faith just because you have doubts. You with me, right? Just because the doubts are present. Because I think you can have doubt, you can have doubts, even significant doubts, and have 100% faith, right? These are perfectly consistent states to be in, right? You can have both, and I promise you won't explode, right? We can give lots of different kinds of examples for this, but getting on an airplane is a pretty good example, right? So if we're about to get on the airplane and we start thinking about what is it we're about to do? Because I told my breakout session that, people who already have a fear of flying, I just make it way worse. So here we go. Right? If we start thinking about it, this is a craft made of metal. This is a thing, might Google it real quick, and we realize that a 747 weighs 1,000,000 pounds. Right? There's processes that have to be timed just right in order for us to get off the ground and to cruise through the sky. We're at 30,000 feet. That's 6 miles off the planet. It's kind of insane. It's kind of insane when you start to think about it, and you might struggle with doubts. But if we're going somewhere, and we're going somewhere good like Palm Beach, right? I'm getting on that airplane. Even if I have these questions, even if I have these doubts. Why? Because I know enough that I can entrust my life to the airplane, to the pilot, to the folks that maintain it and the folks that built it, right? With 100% faith. You kind of don't get the option when it comes to an airplane. It's 100% or zero, right? Now here's I think a beautiful picture of the Christian journey. You can be on the airplane, entrusting your whole life to it, and having a conversation of how in the world does this work? I have no idea. I have no idea how this works, right? And if we're honest, most of us don't know how it works. So that's a pretty beautiful picture of the Christian journey. How many of us get on board, so to speak, right, without having it all figured out? Well, all of us, if we're honest, right? And as we are placing our faith in Christ, we can be asking the questions along the way, and that's perfectly consistent. We can even be struggling while placing faith in Christ with how to answer these questions, and that's perfectly fine. So what I am aiming for here is to release some of the pressure that we feel when we're doubting. Does that make sense? It becomes very emotionally charged. We begin to worry, maybe Christianity's false and this sort of thing. So I'm not saying hang on indefinitely. I'm just saying hang on for a minute. Take a deep breath. Sort of put your doubts in their place. Is a pretty important thing to do. And again, part of why we can do this is because of what faith is. We have, I mentioned in the breakout that we have this in the church, we have this ill-defined notion of faith, it seems to me, right? It's like one of, if not the most important concept to us as Christians, the notion of faith. And yet how many people in your church, like now maybe in this room we've got it all figured out. Maybe we could give, this great definition of faith or whatever, well worked out. But most people, if you asked them, I'm not sure what they would say. And so what we need to be clear on is that faith really is just trust, right? The root word is really just the word trust in the Bible. And the way I like to think of it is that when we place faith in something, we venture ourselves. So if you need a nice, neat sort of, you get some pretentious conference speaker saying that we don't know what faith is, and you can say, I know what faith is. Faith is ventured trust. It's when we kind of risk ourselves. Again, think of the airplane. Getting on board, it's, again, not making you, afraid to fly home or anything, but, right? When we get on board, it's a pretty big venture. We've risked ourselves in a pretty big way. When it goes bad, it goes really bad. But it's faith, and it can be quite reasonable, and we can have some doubts, and it tolerates that. Okay. Second thing I say to do, this is to steal Dallas Willard line, that we need to doubt our doubts. Right? I think it's so important for us to do as we find ourselves in a place of doubt, that one, we just hang on, we put them in their place, we take a deep breath, and then we begin to doubt our doubts. Like, we need to scrutinize our doubts, we need to evaluate our doubts, we need to investigate. Our doubts need evidence to be effective, right? That's why I say hang on. Don't let that emotional chargedness sort of, determine the day or win the day. What you need to do is say, well, where's the evidence? Where does the evidence lead, right? And it has that way of drawing us into it, leaning into it, that again, I think leads us, when done right, towards truth and knowledge. We need to ask, is Q, this objection, really a defeater? That is to say, is it really an objection? Is it really a problem? Because there's some things that people struggle with that aren't actually problems at the end of the day, right? It might be, right, I know Paul Copan talked about the violence in the New Testament. Is there violence in the New Testament? Yes. But should that defeat our Christian beliefs? I say no, right? And moreover, the second way is to say, is Q actually reasonable to believe in at all? Like, should I be finding this plausible? Right? Is this a reasonable objection? It's just tragic. How many people walk away from the faith having never done this at all? It just is because they have a doubt and they walk away as a result of it. I don't know if you've had that experience. I've definitely had that experience where somebody spells out the reason why they walked away, and you think, there's like really good answers to that objection, but they just apparently weren't aware of it, and maybe still aren't either. Okay, back to this. I don't know if I'm excited about this, but anyway, maybe you're not, but this analysis. But, right, so we can kind of see this in both of these examples. So Susie doubts that God exists. So she believes that God exists, but she also believes that gratuitous evil would be inconsistent. If there was such thing as gratuitous evil, that would be a problem for belief in God. Is she right? Yeah, she is. I think that's right. I think there's good reason to think that if there's gratuitous evil, then that's a problem for believing in an all-good, all-powerful God. That's just the problem of evil. You grad students probably know this, and if you looked into it, you'd kind of see that. I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A too. But now come to 3. Where do we go, right? Well, I think we shouldn't find the existence of gratuitous evil all that plausible. I think there's really good reasons to think that gratuitous evil doesn't, in fact, exist. What are those? And we can talk about it. It's all the arguments for God's an all-good, all-powerful God. I think that's where Job lands, by the way. So we would there say, the existence of gratuitous evil isn't when we've leaned in and investigated. Okay, how about Steve? With Steve, again, he believes that the Bible is a moral standard, right? He's doubting that the Bible is a moral standard, so he believes it. But he believes that being out of step with the cultural norms means that the Bible is not a moral standard, if that's right. If it's right that it's out of step with the cultural norms, then it's not a moral standard. That's the right, the conditional. 3, he's finding it plausible that the Bible is out of step with cultural norms. Now, how about number 3? Is that true? Yeah, it is out of step. I think it's just obviously and explicitly out of step with cultural norms. But is that a problem? No, I don't think it's a problem. I think, right, let's critique the cultural norms by the moral standard of the Bible. I think that's where we come out on that. So leaning into it, we see that we can address this doubt because Steve shouldn't believe that those things are a problem, that being out of step with culture norms is a problem. Does that make sense? You with me? Okay. Okay, let me give you some cautions and some tips here. Continuing to think about how to doubt well. Now this, for some audiences, I don't know if PBA audience, this will be controversial, but in some places they don't like me saying this. I say don't aim for 100% certainty, because here's the reality: you won't find it. You won't get there. I'm just telling you, you won't get there. Right? Now, we act like it. We act like, as Christians, as pastors, as ministers, as professors, and so on, we act like we've got 100% certainty, but we don't have it. We just don't. And I, when I talk to, I've gotten better at making this not as controversial, because when I tell people, yeah, I don't think Christianity is 100%, they have a little reaction for some reason. But what I'm saying is that how many of us have literally everything figured out? So none of you have 100% certainty, right? I just proved it. No, but we tell our kids that oftentimes. We often tell our kids or our students or our people in our churches that, no, you have to have 100% certainty. But the problem with this, I have a whole chapter in the book called Certainty is a House of Cards, right? Because when we aim for certainty and we think we have certainty, what does it take for that whole house of cards to come tumbling down? One question. One question we can't answer. And so when we tell our kids, no, you have to be 100%, and then they're sitting in a biology class. I don't mean to pick on biologists, but biology classroom, and there's the professor is antagonistic towards Christianity, and they're dumping on it, and they're arguing that it's not true, and so on. And all of a sudden, the student doesn't know which way is up, how to think of this, how to answer this. They don't have 100% certainty. So what do? They're out. They're out as a result. Right? So don't aim for 100% certainty, aim for 100% confidence. I think you can have 100% confidence. I think you can fully give yourself over to Christianity, 100% in confidence. But notice, confidence can tolerate questions. Confidence can tolerate not having it all figured out. One of my favorite passages in the Bible, I'm really interested in knowledge, and it talks about knowledge, is 1 Corinthians 13:12, where it describes our sort of intellectual epistemic status as seeing through a glass darkly, or seeing through a glass or a mirror dimly. That's just our situation. We are not going to have it all figured out precisely because of our limited sort of epistemic situation. Okay. How am I on time? What do I go to? 15. Okay. Secondly, don't doubt alone. Doubts make you feel isolated. They make you feel like you've stumbled on something that nobody else has seen. And sometimes just the articulation of the doubt is sometimes all it takes in order to say, like, yeah, that was kind of beating me up, but just articulating it with others, having them give you feedback is kind of all it takes. Or hopefully you have access to a community that can help you with this. But what you all have access to is a huge community of books, right? And there are lots and lots of resources to help you walk through. So don't do it alone through your own sort of intellectual pursuits that way in your reading and so on. Don't doubt alone. Do it in community, and books are your friends. I think, books, ancient all the way to contemporary, lots of good authors represented in this conference that will help you walk through whatever it may be. Because sometimes it's not the same for everybody, right? Sometimes it's science, and some people don't care about it. Sometimes it's some sort of historical claim, and some people don't care about it. Sometimes it's philosophical, and sometimes people don't care about that. It doesn't bother them at all. So whatever it is, you find that resource that's most helpful to you. Okay. Thirdly, don't simply deconstruct. I've got a sort of love-hate relationship with the idea of deconstruction. I don't want to sort of fill that out briefly here. Don't simply deconstruct, no matter what it is. I mean, here's the problem with this idea of deconstruction, right? You've heard people talk about deconstruction lately. It's kind of all the rage in some ways. Nobody raised their hand, but I'm going to assume that you do. But okay, right? But I'm always wondering, like, okay, what is deconstruction? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, I know what Derrida meant by it, but like, what do you mean by it? Because it doesn't seem like you're reading Derrida here. So a big question is just, what is this thing? And then, only then, can we figure out if it's good or bad. Now, I'm going to somewhat leave that undefined but what I think it shouldn't mean is merely on, or let me say it differently. If it means merely on the way to deconversion, then of course it's not a good thing. Like, we need to figure out, what are we talking about here? If deconstruction just means that, okay, we're going to be critical of that. But if it's just asking the deep and difficult questions, which is definitely a popular usage of the term deconstruction, or deconstructing someone's ideas, we're just thinking critically about them, then I'm way on board with that. Like, that's fine. That's great. But here's some other worries with that is, don't merely deconstruct because that's a negative project. If you deconstructed your house, well, you got to sleep somewhere, right? You can't just deconstruct. You've got to reconstruct. You've got to build back. And everybody does. Like, it's not optional when it comes to a worldview. You will have a worldview. If you change, if you deconstruct and jettison your worldview, guess what? You still have a worldview. Some new worldview has come in. So do that with care. Do that with diligence. Reconstruct carefully. And a big worry with a lot of the deconstruction folks is that they'll use this incredibly, almost impossible standard of evidence to critique Christianity, one that Christianity could never meet because no view could meet it. And then they just accept uncritically and irrationally, in a way, something like naturalism, right? They don't seem to, it just seems radically inconsistent. So deconstruct, think critically, press these beliefs, but also think critically and be careful and have diligence when you build back. I think when we do that, I think Christianity comes out quite good. Okay, so don't simply deconstruct, but make sure you reconstruct with care. And fourthly, to me, this is one of the most important things that came out of the project of writing this book, is that we need to not have the posture of a skeptic. We need to not doubt in the posture of a skeptic or a cynic. Here's what I mean by that. So when our kids are little, and it's bedtime, and I tell my daughter, let's say, okay, sweetie, it's time for bed. What does she say? Why? No, might be there too, if I'm honest. But she would say, why? And then philosopher dad, I've committed to always answer any question that comes. I want to cultivate a culture of, questioning and so on. I say, well, you need your sleep, so time for bed. Let's go. What does she say? Why? And then I say, well, if you don't, right, makes tomorrow not as fun because you're going to be grumpy, it's going to be tired and whatever, so time for bed. And she says, why? And really, for everything I say, she says, why? And she says, why? Is she really wanting to know why? No. She's just a skeptic. She's just really a cynic. Okay, sorry, 4-year-old daughter. But anyway, she's not really seeking. She's not really in the posture of a seeker. She just doesn't want to go to bed, and she's gotten away with it. She's delayed bedtime by however many minutes. Idiot dad keeps answering your questions. So, right? Don't doubt in the posture of a cynic. Like, be open to the truth when the truth is there. Be open to the evidence when the evidence is there. Like, find the answers. It sounds obvious, right? But I've got too many friends that have gone through a process of deconstruction or doubt where they're presented with the answers, but they're just not there. They're not going to embrace them, and they're going to say, why? And they're going to say, why? And they're going to say, why? They're not in the posture of a seeker, really truly seeking for truth. Jesus puts it this way, which I think puts even a little bit of a bent on what it is to seek. He says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your emotional passions. No, he didn't say that. He says mind, right? Love God with all of your mind. And this, by the way, is the first and greatest commandment. This is what it all sort of stems from, right? I think we don't always have a clear idea of what it even is to love God with our minds, right? Before I learned this material, I would have had no idea. I didn't even notice that. I know I memorized that verse as a high school student. As part of the memorization thing that we did or whatever. I memorized that verse, but I never noticed that it tells us to love God with, in part, to love God with our minds. And so what even is that? Well, here's how I like to think about it. Okay, so I'm guessing it happens here at PBA like it does at DBU and really every other campus that I've been on, is that when you get the new crop of students, what happens is couples form, right? It's disgusting. Now, right, these couples form. These people have fallen deeply in love, in 5 seconds, with each other. And it's the kind of situation where the whole, the building could be on fire and they just don't notice. They're just staring at each other and that kind of thing. Okay, what do couples who are in this deep kind of, well, we'll call it puppy love, do a lot of, right? I mean, not that, right? Not that. It's Christian. It's a Christian place. Okay. What do they do a lot of? Ask each other questions. Pursue each other intellectually. They love each other with their mind. Now, it might be a little superficial. It might just be details about their life or whatever. But one way or the other, they are loving each other with their minds. And I think that's, in a way, what we're called to. Now, a marriage where, right, where we're a little older, it's not quite the puppy love anymore. But I would say it should be richer. It should be a richer pursuit, intellectual pursuit of the other. And any marriage where there is no curiosity, there is no intellectual pursuit, that's a marriage that's in trouble, right? I think a faith that lacks all curiosity, that lacks all intellectual pursuit, is a faith that's in trouble in the same way. So is it dangerous to doubt? Yeah, I mean, there's some risk there. But I think especially with our kids, especially Gen Z, who's questioning everything, and that's just the sort of water in which they swim, it may be more dangerous to not doubt, to avoid those doubts. Because what happens to me, right, I've never been able to just turn that off. I might be able to postpone it for a little time when I'm doubting, but those doubts tend to come back and they bring friends with them, right? I'm in a worse place of doubt. So it may be more dangerous to not doubt, but I think it's absolutely vital, and it's part of Christian discipleship that we ask the big questions, and I think Christianity can handle the biggest questions and the hardest doubts. I just do. I'm committed to that, right? That there are those answers. I think we got some time for Q&A. I do have a newsletter that I meant to tell you about at the front end that if you're interested in, you get a free book as a result of it. It's called the Thinking Thoughts newsletter. I do about once a month right now, where I give 3 thoughts, one of my own, and then 2 quotes. And so if you're interested in that, you get a free book. You can get the free book and then, get off the newsletter right away if you want to. But there you go.
All right. Thank you, Travis.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got like 5 minutes, and I know you're hungry, so let's try to do this really quick. Hey, Nate.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your talk. Question for you. So you mentioned your kind of crisis of faith was studying other religions.
Yeah.
And so you said to, when approaching Christianity, to doubt as a seeker, not as a skeptic or a cynic. So as we study other religions, whether that be, Hinduism, Buddhism, the Muslim faith, how would you say we should approach that? Do we doubt and ask questions of them as seekers or as cynics and skeptics?
Yeah, absolutely as seekers. Absolutely. Because I think, now again, is this a little uncomfortable? Is this a little messy? Is this a little risky? It is. But what matters is, are these other religions true? Now, when I say seeker, I don't necessarily mean like seeker of that religion. So don't hear it that way. I mean seeker as like wanting to know the truth, like genuinely wanting to know the truth. That's a important clarification, so thanks for that. But we need to know, are these alternative religions true? And is Christianity true? And so, again, the reason why I think I doubt it so deeply there, just that we never truly sought, as it relates to Christianity, if it's true over and above these alternatives. But I really think, again, I'm biased. I'll right at the front admit that. But when you line up Christianity and all the other alternative religions and other worldviews, I think Christianity comes out amazingly. I really do. So I'm not afraid for somebody to look at another religion in the posture of a seeker, because I think there are very deep and difficult questions related to those religions that I don't think have good answers, and I've sought for them as a seeker. Whereas Christianity, can we get it all figured out? No, of course not. But it does very, 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 very well.
So I heard some comments, but now I got it, that it's this conference, it's not only Christians that are here, but people that are seeking. So just to clarify, though, about the certainty part, we know as Christians, our certainty in Jesus Christ, that certainty in him is not questionable in any way. And also, as far as the whole seeking and, clarify more when it comes to the certainty, though, because we need, we have to reach the lost for Jesus. So that's mine.
Okay, great question. So, yeah, and this is kind of the worry as it relates to certainty that often comes up. Part of it is I'm using a particular notion of certainty, which means that we can't possibly be wrong. We can't, there's no conceivable way in which we can be wrong. And I would have to admit, and again, we might not agree on this, but I don't think we can have that level of certainty in the truth of Christianity. I think we can realize that it's very, 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 very likely, but I don't think we can get all the way to it's not even conceivable that it's false. Now, this is a little hard. This is kind of a philosopher's use of the word certainty. What I don't mean is, do I have my mind 100% made up? I am certain in Jesus. I would use that notion of certainty. That's totally fine. My mind is made up. But it doesn't mean, even the way you said it, again, we might just disagree, and that's totally fine, at least for me. For me it is. When you say it's not questionable, I want to say, of course it's questionable. I want my own children to question whether or not, or question things about Jesus and whether they should believe in them, because if they don't, I fear that they won't ever truly make their faith their own. And again, as we said over here, it's I'm really confident in the answers that we can give. And so while it scares me to death in a way that my kids would, potentially walk away, right? That'd be the last thing I want to happen. But I'm worried that by saying, look, this isn't questionable, right? I'm setting them up to walk away in a sense, because if it's not questionable, and they're listening to their very loud voices in their lives as they just go through life now that they're out of the home, let's say, they're in a secular, let's say, state school or something, or in a job, or they're just thinking about it themselves and they say, oh, this isn't questionable, but I've got questions, what do I do? You see what I mean? I want them to ask those questions, and I especially want my kids to ask those questions when they're in my house, when they're still with me. And I want them to ask our youth pastor, and I want them to ask our pastor, as well as their other people in their lives and so on. So I'm worried about putting it in the category of being unquestionable and just a matter of certainty, in that sense of certainty.
All right, let's give Dr. Dickinson a round of applause. Thank you, Travis.